China cannot win India. It is not just a simple budget and army problem. It is something deeper. It is the geography itself, a system of denial that neutralizes superior numbers and technology. To understand it better, watch the video. In the calculus of modern warfare, the disparity between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of India appears insurmountable. The PLA commands the world's largest standing ground force and a defense budget that eclipses New Delhi's by a factor of 3. Beijing's naval production capacity alone rivals the output of entire NATO alliances. By conventional metrics, tonnage, airframes, and cyber capabilities, strategic models predict a swift and decisive Chinese hegemony. Yet, conflict is not conducted in the abstract. It is bound by the rigid realities of terrain. And the theater of engagement here, the Himalayas, is the most inhospitable combat environment on Earth. Along the line of actual control, two nuclear-armed powers remain locked in a perpetual stare-down. Despite the rhetoric, kinetic escalation is rare. The front remains frozen, literally and strategically. This stalemate is not merely a product of diplomatic restraint or nuclear deterrence. It is enforced by a geographic framework that neutralizes technological superiority. To understand why a superpower finds its options limited here, we must analyze the operational ceiling, the point where physics overrides policy. History provides a definitive case study. In 1962, the PLA executed a textbook offensive, penetrating deep into Indian territory with speed and tactical brilliance. However, the advance was halted not by enemy fire, but by the culminating point. As supply lines extended, they became brittle. The onset of winter threatened to sever the connection to the rear. The Chinese leadership recognized a critical vulnerability. Staying meant encirclement by the elements. They withdrew to preserve the force. The mountains had imposed a logistical veto. This established a doctrine that stands today. Territorial gains in this sector are meaningless if they cannot be sustained through the winter isolation. Modern aviation has evolved, but atmospheric physics has not. The critical variable is density altitude. At 14,000 feet, air density is approximately 40% lower than at sea level. For turbofan engines, air is mass. Reduced air density results in a precipitous drop in thrust generation. A J-11 fighter launching from the Tibetan Plateau cannot achieve maximum takeoff weight. Commanders face a zero-sum equation: sacrifice fuel for ordnance or ordnance for fuel. This significantly degrades combat radius and loiter time. Conversely, the Indian Air Force benefits from a lowland advantage. Key air bases like Tezpur are situated near sea level, allowing aircraft to launch with full payloads before climbing to the engagement zone. The constraint extends to human physiology. Acclimatization is a biological imperative that cannot be bypassed. Rapid mass deployment into this zone invites mass casualties from high-altitude pulmonary edema. While armies march on calorie reserves, mechanized units run on hydrocarbons. In extreme cold, fuel consumption rates triple, while efficiency plummets. The winter stocking window is narrow. Supply routes are viable for only 6 months. Strategic reserves must be pre-positioned before the passes are sealed by snow. China has invested heavily in infrastructure, bringing rail and macadamized roads to the plateau. Yet the last mile remains the most vulnerable link in the chain. These arteries are susceptible to geological instability. A single landslide or precision strike on a bridge can isolate a battalion-sized element. India's counter-strategy involves geological bypass. Projects like the Atal Tunnel
represent an engineering effort to render supply lines immune to surface conditions. If the terrestrial border represents a stalemate, the strategic competition pivots 3,000 kilometers south to the maritime domain. China's economy is reliant on a single vulnerable artery, the Malacca Strait. Roughly 80% of Beijing's hydrocarbon imports transit this narrow waterway. India's Andaman and Nicobar Command functions as a geographic gatekeeper, projecting power directly across this choke point. This creates cross-domain deterrence. Aggression in the Himalayas carries the risk of economic asphyxiation in the Indian Ocean. Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, specifically the CPEC corridor, is an attempt to engineer a bypass to this dilemma. However, these alternatives remain incomplete and politically fragile. What variables could break this deadlock? Both nations are pursuing technological offsets, light tanks designed for high altitude, swarm drones, and persistent surveillance. Yet technology has limitations. Battery density degrades in extreme cold. Optical satellites are blinded by cloud cover. The fundamental friction of the terrain remains constant. We are left with a state of violent peace, and militarized ecosystem where thousands of troops remain deployed, constrained not by a lack of will, but by the physical limits of their environment. Here, geography is the ultimate arbiter. China may possess the larger force, but in this domain, the mountain commands, and the mountain does not negotiate.